Today, we want to talk about the stories of Jesus in the Bible and ask the question, is it fact or fiction? Is it fact? Did it really happen this way? Or is it made up? Is it just symbol? Is it just a myth? And the answer to this clearly is both. When the Bible says, Pontius Pilate was the governor and tried Jesus, that sounds like a fact. When Jesus says, I am the bread of life, I am the living water, he's speaking in a metaphor. It's a symbol, clearly. And I think if we read the Bible, we can tell the difference between these. Children can do this. My favorite example comes from when my daughters were little. And I would, as I was putting them to bed at night, read to them. And one night I was reading from The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, the C.S. Lewis book. And I told them about the death of Aslan, this very good, kind king of a lion. And I told it very dramatically, and they fought back a tear because Aslan had died. And really, later that day, their great-grandmother Stevens died. So I just told them about the death of Aslan. Then I came in to tell them about the death of grandmother Stevens. And they cried again. And they understood the difference, even as little children. They knew that Aslan, that was a figure that was just in a story. Grandmother Stevens was a real person, and we'd be going to a funeral in a couple of days. So we can tell the difference. Jesus was crucified outside Jerusalem. That's intended as a fact. But when Jesus says that there was a man who had two sons, he's making up a story. Jesus is a great fiction writer. He's not thinking about Eliezer who lived at 14 Jericho Road. He makes up the story. The story carries truth, even though it's made up. So we can tell the difference between these. Clearly, now there are errors in the Bible. Luke's gospel begins by saying when Quirinius was governor, and this is the same time that Herod was king, but we know from Roman records that can't work. Those didn't really overlap. Oh, it's an error, but does that mean everything is erroneous? We're not so good at our own lives remembering what happened a number of years ago. This Bible story is 2,000 years old. Everything from the ancient world has little historical missteps in it. And we have to think about this. David McCullough was this great American historian. One time gave a lecture about how we do history. And in that, he said this that I love. He said, the truth of history is the objective, always. He said, but the truth isn't just the facts. You can have all the facts imaginable and miss the truth, just as you can have facts missing or some wrong and reach the larger truth. Isn't that interesting? So all the facts in the Bible may not be absolutely right, but we can still get to the truth. I recently read a book by a guy that I went to school with, and he's now a brilliant New Testament scholar named Dale Allison. And in it, he thinks about the temptation story of Jesus. If you read it in Mark and in Matthew and in Luke, it's a little different each time, the order of the temptations, what exactly happened. What he says is that no one of those is a videotape of what happened with Jesus out in the wilderness. I mean, nobody saw it. It says the devil took him to a place where he could see all the kingdoms of the earth. Where would that place be? He says it's a made-up story, but it captures the truth. Because the truth about Jesus is that he had power, but he refused to use it for himself. He was constantly under temptation, but yet he resisted that temptation because his greater goal was to serve God. That's interesting, isn't it? Because it's that larger truth that we're after that's embedded in this story. And if we're wrong on this, I mean, let's just admit it. If Dale Allison is wrong and goes to heaven one day and God says, that really was a videotape of what happened with Jesus in the desert. If this happens to us, we can say, well, sorry. We were trying our best to get to the heart of the story and not get stuck in those details, you see. We know there are textual errors in the way that the Bible was copied. But none of them are really substantive. Bart Ehrman, he's done really well selling a lot of books criticizing the Bible. He has this book called Misquoting Jesus, the story behind who changed the Bible and why. It all sounds very nefarious there, doesn't it? And he has example after example in here, and we've known these forever, that there are early copies of the Bible and they don't all agree with each other in small detail. The amazing thing is how much they do agree with each other. They don't always agree with each other. Scribes are copying late at night, they're tired, they make mistakes, they leave things out. Some of these are interesting. I mean, one that he makes a big deal of is Luke reports Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and it says that he prayed so strongly that his sweat became like drops of blood. Well, this is missing in some of the early manuscripts. So he says, he didn't really sweat drops of blood, or they were trying to make him appear more human. But nothing really changes if you have it or don't have it, because Jesus is still praying in agony in Gethsemane. He says they're trying to make Jesus seem more human, but then part of what all this criticism of the Gospels is about is saying that Jesus was made to be more human. It's just very interesting, isn't it? Or he talks about a story in Mark where Jesus sees a leper. And in Mark, it says that when Jesus saw the leper, he became angry and he stretched out his hand to heal the man. When Luke reports the same story, he says that Jesus was compassionate and he stretched out his hand. Well, you can imagine seeing a leper, somebody who'd been ostracized by society, that would make Jesus angry. His anger would be part of his compassion. So it's a textual difference, but there's nothing substantive. There aren't early copies of the Gospels that say Jesus didn't rise from the dead or he didn't, any of these things. It's always small details, and we've known about these all along. What we come out with here, you see, is really a messy sense of what the Bible is. I mean, we don't have any idea, we've never believed that the Bible was dictated by God and it floated down in some kind of perfect, pristine form. And the Bible's messy. There were human authors and humans who copied it. And this is as it should be, because the whole point of the gospel is that God came down into our messy, inexact, flawed existence. And so we're not at all surprised that the story about Him, it's a little bit messy. It's got a few flaws in it, just like you and I do, because that's what Jesus came down to save and to redeem. So do the Gospels have fact or fiction? Both. And we give thanks to God for that.